What would your project, Cloud for Europe, how would that help defend European citizens from snooping?
Long before the revelations that basically we are all moving into the cloud, and there's a feeling very much in Europe that we have missed the boat on the cloud. And
this is storing data remotely.
Storing data, just not on your computer. I mean, there's no, it's not a cloud. There's no cloud, and it can be even next door, but you're not storing your own data on your own computer. And here, the leaders in the game have been in U.S. companies, Amazon, Dropbox, Google, for a long, long time, and everyone. I mean, they comprise the bulk of these services, and there's a lot of money to be made there. But they're going out. It's going out of Europe, and so the Europeans decided, well, maybe we should see why we're not doing this, and maybe we can come up with sort of some standards that would allow us to do the same thing in Europe. It took off. This group that came together last year took off after June 6th, of course, because suddenly we realized that these cloud services that we use in Europe are, in fact, not as secure as we thought.
What makes you think that European citizens would trust that more, though? Given that, that's also subject to spying by our own agencies.
Well, I mean, this is ultimately, it is an issue of trust. I mean, well, the alternative is that you end up having national cloud services, which of course won't be so effective because cloud services operate on the basis of economies of scale. So you could have your own national cloud and it's not going to be as good, it's not going to work as well as something more massive. We ultimately do need a certain level of trust, and if you don't have that level of trust, then it means don't use the cloud.
The European Commission has concluded that Washington has been forcing US companies like Google, etc., to hand over European customers' data. How do you think the EU should respond to that?
Well, I think the solution will be that we already have cloud services that are strictly European, and to make sure that we have our standards for it, because I mean, it's people themselves choose to put their data into Google, for example, or Amazon. They should know that, in fact, with U.S. law, extraterritoriality, these companies must comply with U.S. law. It's what allows the U.S. to have something such as a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which Europe should have, I think, in which you can prosecute U.S. companies that engage in bribery. We should have one of those too, I think. But I mean, that kind of extraterritoriality means that if that your data will be subject to U.S. law as well as the law of your own land. But if we have a cloud that is subject only to European law and European privacy regulations, then that worry is gone.
The ordinary user logs onto the computer, does a Google search, posts something on Twitter, goes on Facebook, emails via Gmail. I mean, what practical differences would what you're proposing have?
Virtually none, and in fact, these are the people who are most people, as you yourself said, are not really that concerned about these things because they're not. People think they're not going to be targets anyway, and they're not targets. I mean, dealing with all these data means that they are looking at very specific things, and I think that's part of the apathy. Which, I mean, there are people who are fundamentally against this idea that anyone is looking at their mail, but most people are not. I mean, they're not looking at your mail anyway. The best they're doing is looking at who you're talking to. I mean, as sort of the example is that you probably would not be that exercised by something where it turns out that by looking at who's talking to whom, a guy next door to you and living in an apartment or a flat has bought 3 tons of fertilizer.
You might be exercised though if you're an innocent citizen and you're having your emails, okay, not read, but it's being looked at who you're...
Right, I mean, some people are bothered by that, and I mean, I would be bothered clearly if I knew that, if I knew for sure my emails were being monitored. Basically, because of my job, I assume they're doing that anyway.
You've got no evidence for that, I'm assuming, though.
I have no evidence. I mean, I take precautions, I think, as everyone should, and that's one of the things our government does, is offers encryption to all our citizens.
So how many of your emails do you encrypt then?
Not many. I mean, because, I mean, I mean, what's needed, but it's, but I mean, that's, I mean, what's ordinary for governments. I mean, a lot of things you just don't, I mean, documents that, memos come in encrypted form and you read them.
So you assume that around the world your emails are being
For
monitored?
example, in Russia, since 2003, there's been a law that requires all internet service providers to go through the FSB, which is the domestic intelligence or security agencies. I mean, it is, I mean, that means that all emails must go through the secret police. I mean, this is not a matter of anyone tapping in. Your plumbing goes right through that. Well, I mean, I think it's a fairly good assumption, therefore, that if a mail comes, an email goes from me to someone in that country, given it comes from me, it will probably be looked at. I mean, and if we look at the very strong surveillance of even things such as the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, Weibo, they're monitoring that because people are being arrested for what they say. So,
but you're not bothered unduly by the surveillance of your own emails. You think it comes with the territory?
I have assumed that it comes with the job. I mean, that's and everyone assumes it comes with the job, and I mean, I don't really, I can't imagine anyone who is involved in sort of at a national level of politics, whether you're in government or in the opposition, that doesn't really think about, well, or I mean, sort of should assume that someone may be doing that. Not necessarily, I mean, I think your own government is doing it, because I think in most liberal democracies, if your own government is doing it, it's the risks of what will happen to you if you're caught are fairly high. I mean, you go to jail, and so I mean, they may be doing it. I assume if they were doing it in most liberal democracies, they're doing with a court order in a criminal case. But just following what people are doing in your own country is probably a bad idea.
So finally, to worry about America and what they've been getting up to with surveillance is slightly missing the point in your view when I mean, just today we've had it reported that Angela Merkel's phone was actually being listened into by no fewer than 5 foreign powers.
Well, I think that is an example of the kind of, the world that we live in today, and some of us have assumed it for a longer period of time. I think this kind of the Enlightenment era idea of privacy, as you would say, or I would say privacy, is something that we should abandon. I mean, not willingly, not happily, but the reality is that that it is not as great. I mean, that the privacy is something that it has a little currency among governments today, regardless. I would also say that, in fact, the real issues we face, given that, is I'm much more worried about data integrity than, I mean, people monitoring what I have as data bothers or worries me far less than, in fact, someone might be changing the data that I have, be it in my bank account, be it in my medical records, changing my blood type, being it in the power station, sending different signals to the power station. That's all operating on the web. That the confidentiality side, in fact, is less of a security risk than, in fact, if someone is manipulating the data and you have a nuclear power plant. I mean, that's much worse than just knowing what the data are. This is all an introduction to a whole new world that I think we've become far more alert to since June, or at least the public has, and I think we'll be dealing with this much, much more in the future, and maybe that's a good thing, that people will finally realize how dependent we are on all of this technology, how it's being used and abused and misused, and a public awareness that usually make people campaign that would put everyone to sleep, in fact, now has a little boost.